Theirs is a tale with two distinct halves. From 1992 to 97, Dorian Yates and Ronnie Coleman were in the same lineups 8 times. The former won all 8 contests, while the latter never came closer than 5th. But that tells only half the story, the one about Yates and his 6 indomitable years as Mr. Olympia. But what do they say about each other today? Let's find out. Here's the other half. Coleman reinvented himself in 1998, the year after Yates retired, and began his own 8-year reign of Olympia's supremacy. In one of the frustrating quirks of history, they were never even in the same callout. In fact, their peaks were separated by a whole decade. Even though Yates is only 2 years older than Coleman, the former reached his shocking best in 1993, while the latter supersized in 2003. We never got to see them face off when at their most colossal. That's why we're approximating that dream duel in our imagination. But the rivalry? Oof, it remains hot. Boy oh boy, the discussion regarding the best back amongst the two. We are so stoked about this. Dorian Yates and Ronnie Coleman have 14 Sandows between them. They are some of the biggest and greatest bodybuilders of our generation. Dorian Andrew Mientiez Yates is an English retired professional bodybuilder. He won the Mr. Olympia title 6 consecutive times from 1992 to 1997 and has the 5th highest number of Mr. Olympia wins in history, ranking behind Ronnie Coleman, Lee Haney, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Phil Heath. They push the boundaries of the sport of bodybuilding and can be credited with making mass monsters the new normal. However, diverse in their backgrounds, both Olympia champs had one thing in common. They set new standards in the back department. Their backs were so wide, they pulled the curtains on their competition. Chest striations, bicep peaks, six-pack abs, those are all nice, but a wide and thick back is what separates men from boys, pros from rookies, and legends from mere mortals. When 8-time Mr. Olympia Ronnie Coleman gets asked if he would do anything different, he responds in perfect Ronnie fashion, "I would have trained harder." In many ways, Coleman's workouts were a throwback to an earlier era. He stressed body parts twice weekly and often trained twice daily, and he emphasized free weight basics. For example, his typical chest exercises were all presses, flat, incline, and decline with a barbell in one workout and with dumbbells in the next. What distinguished him were the numbers he put up for 10 to 12 reps in workout after workout for more than a decade. There were 2,300-pound leg presses, 540-pound T-bar rows, 200-pound incline dumbbell presses, and 700-pound behind-the-back shrugs. While Ronnie Coleman's balls-to-the-wall, all-out training isn't for the faint of heart, the simplistic yet effective rules that he followed will stand the test of time.
I look at Ronnie and I think it must be tough to be like that, you know, especially as he be so active. But he's handling it well. He's laughing and he's smiling, and he seems to be okay. Ronnie Coleman is 8 times Mr. Olympia. He did an amazing thing with his life. People won't forget that. You know, his name will go on forever. So maybe he figures that's a price that was worth paying. That's the nature of a champion, but it can become self-destructive at some point. You know, disabled, this is the only vehicle I've got to experience life in, and if it's not working properly, the quality of life in the experience is not so good.
Rivalry refresher course. When it comes to heavy hitters in the history of Mr. Olympia, there is only a small number of athletes who hit the mark for a high number of Sandow trophies. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Phil Heath, Lee Haney, and Ronnie Coleman come to mind. Then, of course, there's also Dorian Yates, who landed a total of 6 Olympia wins. Immediately after Yates stepped down, Ronnie Coleman went on to earn himself 8 Sandow trophies, tying for the world record set by Lee Haney. In a GI exclusive vault interview, Dorian Yates reflects on the moment Ronnie Coleman surpassed Yates' record. During the filming of Ronnie Coleman, the King, GI spoke to a wide variety of legendary bodybuilders. Dorian Yates was one such bodybuilder, the reigning champ just before Ronnie rose up to the occasion. Like all films, not everything was able to fit into the final cut. That's why they pulled out this extended interview from the cutting room floor featuring Dorian Yates.
I probably saw a picture of Ronnie when he won the World Championships, I believe, and heard his name then. He didn't place very highly, but I did notice him, and I thought this guy's got a great structure and great potential. And saw him in the 92 Mr. Olympia, the first one I won in Finland. I believe that was his first Mr. Olympia. I like to think I was very good at recognizing potential. I saw Ronnie Coleman before he was really recognized.
Though Lee Haney had already reached 8 Mr. Olympia wins, setting the world record, before Dorian Yates, it doesn't take away from the high level of excellence Yates achieved with his 6 wins. It placed him as one of the most winningest Mr. Olympia athletes of all time. Would another competitor be able to match up moving forward?
Fortunately, it took quite some time for him to reach that potential. Could see that Ronnie had the structure and the muscle bellies and so on to be very good. All throughout my Olympia reign, he was getting better and better and better. So I think 96, he really started to look, even myself, I think it was a surprise that Ronnie won. I mean, I knew he had potential, but I guess everyone just thought, kind of assumed that Flex was going to win. But Ronnie made some even further improvements that year and was able to beat Flex. Seems to be the optimal kind of height for Mr. Olympia, which is about 5'10", 5'11". Ronnie didn't really have any weakness. Maybe his calves were not great, but generally speaking, he had full muscle bellies all over his body, had a good structure. So he had all the potential there. Doing it while still holding down a job as well, which is pretty tough. Quite a way through his pro career, he was still working as a cop in Texas, which couldn't be ideal for your preparations and so on. So
ultimately, the answer to this was answered immediately after Dorian Yates' reign. It came in the form of Ronnie Coleman, who is now often considered one of the greatest bodybuilders to ever live. Of course, there was no way of 100% knowing that while Yates was still competing, Ronnie still had a lot of improvements to make, and it wasn't clear if he had the mentality to bring him up to the next level. Of course, we all know what happened next. Ronnie Coleman seemingly transformed overnight and became a sensation. He earned himself 8 Mr. Olympia wins and tied for the world record. No one has been able to match it since. So how did Dorian Yates react once his streak had been bested? At this point, Yates had already retired due to injuries. There was no way for him to bring his best, as we had saw during his prime. But there's no denying that any of these top athletes have a true hunger and competitive spirit. Did Ronnie's high level of success make Yates wonder, what if? Not too bothered. During GI's sit-down interview, Dorian Yates didn't seem too bothered by it at all. He's come to terms with the fact that there was already an athlete who achieved 8 wins before him. He also seemed to come to terms with his injuries and retirement. He's even more recently said his injury was a blessing in disguise. That being said, Dorian Yates is still a proud man. He makes a point to reference that his 6 wins were during a much more competitive era of the sport, at least in his opinion. He makes a brief argument that perhaps his 6 wins are worth more than Ronnie Coleman's 8. There's no statistical way to really prove such a thing. If anything, it's good to know that Yates still has some competitive spirit left in him. He's proud of those wins. He stands by them. If only we could have seen these 2 athletes compete against each other, both in their prime.
I didn't know if he would have been Mr. Olympia. I just knew he had the potential. Whether that's going to be achieved or not is a different question, and I didn't know Ronnie personally well enough. But Ronnie was not like that. Ronnie is kind of like myself. You know, he's a worker. We worked the competition. Later on, I could see that he was very dedicated. I saw Ronnie on the road, always doing his cardio, always training, never taking a day off, where the other guys, you know, they would take some downtime and so on. Comparing the best that I'd seen before of the 2 of them, but Ronnie had made some great improvements that year, and somebody said to me, Ronnie could take this, and I kind of thought, wow, I don't think Ronnie's going to beat Flex. So yeah, he was in great shape. He had the size, but he was also, at that point, also still very cut and in very good shape.
That's all for this video, folks. See you another time.